Okay, so welcome to the next video in a how to read series for this course. This one happens to be on Valentine Worth's encapsulation of Jeffrey Sonnabend's work, Obliscence, Theories of Forgetting and the Problem of Matter. So you should read this article today. Hope you like it. I'm a huge fan of both Sonnabend and Worth's work. Let me start by saying a little bit about the authors. So Jeffrey Sonnabend was born in Brazil in 1888. Um, he was an associate professor of neurophysiology at Northwestern for most of his career, and while he was there, he wrote a 3-volume work, which he called Obliscence, Theories of Forgetting and the Problem of Matter, which is about human memory. So we obviously can't read a 3-volume work, so what's assigned for this class is a short piece by Valentine Worth, who's also a neuroscientist and contemporary with Sonnabend. And this is a brief encapsulation written by Worth of what Jeffrey Sonnabend's theory of memory is. From the very first page, we see that Jeffrey Sonnabend says, "We amnesiacs, all condemned to live in an eternally fleeting present, have created the most elaborate of human constructions, memory, to buffer ourselves against the intolerable knowledge of the irreversible passage of time and the irretrievability of its moments and events." So at the core of Sonnabend's theory, what he's saying is that humans don't actually have a memory. What they have is a forgetting. That those experiences that you have are constantly disappearing, and we have tried to cope with that by changing what we call it or changing how we think of it, right? But that doesn't change the process. So for him, according to Worth at least, the problem, and to Sonnabend, the problem is that humans do not like to acknowledge the passage of time. They don't like to acknowledge getting older. They don't like to acknowledge oncoming death or the fact that we die at all. Those are things that are scary, terrifying, problematic for us. And so we come up with ways of thinking of the world in order to help us cope with that, help us to feel better about those facts. And memory is one of them, according to Sonnabend. Now, you've seen his graphs, you've seen his charts with the cone of Obliscence and the hollows and the Spalaean axis, the atmonic disk, the Spalaean disk. I'm not sure if you see how those work, but essentially what we're talking about is that your consciousness is a cone, right? It's shaped as a cone, and the plane which passes through the cone is an experience that a human might have. Now, your consciousness, your present consciousness, the thing that you access the world with, is your atmonic disk. You can almost consider that your eyes, or the center, the Spalaean axis, where it crosses the atmonic disk. That's essentially your eyesight. Because everything that's in your view, everything that you see of the world or understand of the world, all of your senses, of course, but that is where the atmonic disk comes in. So when the edge of that plane crosses at the base of the cone and crosses the atmonic disk, that's when you're actively having an experience. That's when the experience is currently going on and you're in it. Like, for example, in this case, for me, the plane that's crossing my atmonic disk is making a video for a summer session course. And for you, at a different time, the plane that is crossing your atmonic disk at the moment is you watching a video for your summer course. Those two things are happening at independent times, right? But for each of the subjectivities, it's the plane crossing the disk that counts as the actual experience. Now, once that experience is over, once I finish making this video, once you finish watching the video, the bottom edge of that plane will have passed the atmonic disk, right? It will no longer be touching or in contact with the atmonic disk. But, according to Sonnabend, the plane will still be passing through the hollows, right? It will still be moving, but the angle of the plane will still make it pass through the hollows. And as it passes through the hollows, that's what you would call the past. That's what you would call memory. But for Sonnabend, it's very important to realize that this plane moving through the hollows is the decaying of experience. So it's not that you're remembering the experience. It's actually that you're forgetting it. It's that it's actively decaying as it passes away from the time in which you had that experience. It's melting away, so to speak. And once the plane passes all the way, so that it is no longer in contact with the cone at all, it's passed through the tip of the cone at the very top, then you've forgotten it completely, and the experience is lost. Unless you have the experience again, in which case a new plane will start through the cone, right? So for me, this makes a lot of sense. It should sort of make a lot of sense for you too, because the theory is basically just the reverse of how you normally think of things, right? In fact, we saw at the very start of the semester, we had this picture that I drew of the boat with the anchor. That was the metaphor from Proust, right? Proust talking about calling the anchor up from the depths. But really, what Proust is describing is the same thing that Sonnabend is describing, except he's reversed it. So if you think of the body of water as the cone, with the tip of the cone, your subconscious up here at the top, right? And the mnemonic disc here at the surface of the water, where the boat is, where your consciousness is, then what's happening is the plane is passing through the cone, and Proust is trying to recall it. He's trying to stop the decay of that particular memory. It's just flipped. Everything's flipped. The structure of it is flipped. What we call it is flipped. So what we call memory, Sonnabend calls forgetting. And so in a weird way, we're actually talking about the same thing. Sonnabend and anybody talking about memory is actually talking about the same thing, except Sonnabend has flipped it in order to call attention to how we might be corrupting things in order to prevent fear of the passage of time, of getting old, of death, of all those sorts of things, right? So that's a brief encapsulation of Valentine Worth's encapsulation of Jeffrey Sonnabend's theory of obliscence, or forgetting. I'm not sure how much stock you put in this. It's a scientific article, so you might have trusted it. You might think it makes a lot of sense, and it does. But here's the thing. It's entirely fiction. So there actually is no Jeffrey Sonnabend. There is no such person as Valentine Worth. Both of the authors are fictional characters, and the work is actually a short story, not a scientific article. It comes from a pamphlet, right, which is put out by an organization called the Museum of Jurassic Technology. The Museum of Jurassic Technology is a museum in Culver City, California, which is in Los Angeles. And the experiment of the museum is that it sort of makes fun of museums. I shouldn't say makes fun of in any kind of malicious way, but it examines how museums work and what the consequences are of museums and artifacts and that sort of thing. So I highly recommend. It has a website. You should go check it out. I don't know if any of you did research, but if you did research, you probably tried to figure out who Jeffrey Sonnabend was, and you didn't get very far because he's not an actual person. This, I assume, was a pamphlet written by David Wilson, who is the founder of the Museum of Jurassic Technology. Now, the reason that I wanted to assign this text is because we have been looking at how, in terms of memory, in terms of narrative, our authors have been playing with it, right? Have been fooling around, changing narrative in order to match the memory. So we saw that with Ceylon and his obscure poem. We saw that with The Fall, right, where he's telling you the story, but he's not really telling you the story. Now we've seen it with Valentine Worth, where he's giving you a theory of memory, which actually makes a whole lot of sense, but is not scientific at all. And then we're going to see it again when we get to the Emigrants, and I'm going to have another video up for you to about how to read the Emigrants. So you should look for that soon. But it's really an amazing thing for me because this is a work of fiction. This is essentially a metaphor for memory, and yet it still functions just as well as if, for me, as if it were an actual scientific theory. Like, it still makes sense. It still feels correct in a way if you take the time to figure it out, which I'm hoping you've done as you've read through the short story. So this should fit in with your assignment this week, which is to find and research a scientific article about memory yourself, and then to summarize it in the course blog for the rest of the class. The idea being that hopefully we get some more actual, let's say, scientific versus literary background on memory, have a better base for understanding it, but also to show you that all of these things, whether it's a history book, whether it's a scientific article, whether it's a novel, whether it's a short story, whether it's a poem, all of these things are narratives. They're all texts that are being put together by people. And so they are subject by authors. And so they are subject to various flaws, various changes, um, just like your own memory. Like you're the author of your very first memory, right? You're the one who wrote the narrative. And so it should be accurate since it is your first memory. And yet we discovered that even then, even when the memory actually belongs to you and you're the only one who has access to it, it's still difficult to actually make it as accurate as possible. That's some of the stuff that Sonnabend, Worth, David Wilson are playing with here.